What? He just pressed record, then he backed off from the camera because editing is for losers. I'm still going to edit on this video. Hello! If you're thinking, wait, the Tat Cave looks different, that's because you haven't been paying attention. I am not at home right now. I'm in Lincoln. Am I in Lincoln? I am in Lincoln. I'm at the New Theatre Royal in the pantomime Aladdin. In fact, bosh, there you go. That's us. Look at us, all pretty and ting. If you want to come see it, you can get to Lincoln between now and January the 7th. Tickets are available from New Theatre Royal, lincoln.co.uk. But I've been watching a bunch of films since we last talked movies. If you want to see my Justice League review, I did that separately a couple of weeks ago when I first arrived here. But I thought I'd do a catch-up since our last big movie review video was the summer releases, going all the way up to It. So it's time to continue with Mother. This is a Darren Aronofsky flick starring Javier Bardem and Jennifer Lawrence, aka a really talented guy who I mostly see in terrible projects, and a not that talented actor who is blown up because she's quirky, but she's revealed several times to be a bit of an arsehole. I'm namely talking about that whole Golden Globes incident from last year. Never forgot that, really soured me on her. However, I tried to go into Mother with an open mind, because I didn't really know what it was about. The trailers were very vague, and that was all a very conscious decision. I will not spoil what Mother is about here, if you are curious. I do think it is worth seeing once, but I would not actively seek it out. I would wait until it shows up on a streaming service you're already paying for, and maybe give it a try. Mother is the story of a woman and her husband living in his old childhood home that she has helped rebuild. He's a writer, he's trying to get his next project out, but it's not quite coming to him, and she's starting to grow a little frustrated, even though she's been very supportive. Then one night, a stranger visits the house, and he stays overnight. And then his wife joins the next day. And then their sons arrive the day after that. And the film is told from the point of view of Jennifer Lawrence's character having to deal with these essentially invited home invaders, which at first I was like, wow, this is cool. This is a home invasion movie, but with permission given. And it's just one person's fine with it and the other isn't. Okay, this is different. It's not that at all. The entire movie is an allegory. It is allegorical. I won't say what for, but if you've seen the names of the characters, like the actual characters' names, you'll have figured it out. Mother itself is in reference to one of the characters and what they really mean. It's... how do I put this? There's no message behind its allegory. There's kind of a message, but there isn't. So you end the film going, oh, right, that's what it meant. But why? There's no lesson, really. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, everything that's allegorical has to try to impart a message upon you, but this one almost felt like it was sort of doing that, and then on reflection, you're like, wait, no, it isn't. Some interesting visuals, mostly pretentious, kind of a waste of your time, is not a horror. Don't go in thinking it's a horror, or indeed a thriller. It's not even really a psychological horror, either. It's just a weird experiment that happens to have some freaky visuals in it. Don't chase this. If you're desperately interested and you want to see it, maybe you are a big Jennifer Lawrence fan and you want to see it, you might enjoy it, but... Kingsman: The Golden Circle. I was a huge fan of Kingsman: The Secret Service. Still am a huge fan of The Secret Service. It's a great film. What's happened here is, I think, what happened with partly the X-Men franchise after First Class, but very specifically what happened with Kick-Ass 2. Matthew Vaughn directed X-Men First Class, Kick-Ass, and Kingsman. Jane Goldman was the scriptwriter for all three of those movies. Then when it came to X-Men, Bryan Singer took over with Days of Future Past, but Vaughn was producer, and it was sort of that weird thing of, okay, we like what we did last time, but we're going to focus more on something else. In that case, it was the older cast returning. In Kick-Ass's case, they doubled down on the controversial elements. I hit girl swearing and hit girl committing acts of violence, there being some really sort of uncomfortable violence and sexual tones in the movie that just didn't feel very nice, and that harmed Kick-Ass 2. Now, I've read those books, and I really like Kick-Ass, and I really like Kick-Ass 3, I think Kick-Ass 2 is fine as a book. As a film, I thought it was like, oh, this is a bit of a wasted opportunity, after the first one was such an interesting take on the book, but through a Hollywood lens. Same things happened with Kingsman. The Golden Circle doubles down on the stuff that I think most people had a problem with Kingsman. Like the really sort of, oh, we're like Bond, so we're gonna make this sex bit, like the sex joke, sort of be really, really hardcore, and everyone will piss themselves laughing because they'll be like, oh, I can't believe they went there, and instead you're just like, really, you're gonna have a camera follow that finger down there? It's just like, guys, they overdo a bunch of stuff that was really great in the first one as well, that makes it less unique in retrospect. For example, the way the church fight sequence is shot in Kingsman. Every action sequence is shot like this in Kingsman, the Golden Circle. Taron Egerton, who was the best thing about the first one, is not given very much to do dramatically or physically in this film. In comparison to the last one, there are some wonderful cast members in Kingsman 2 who are underused, and then there are wonderful cast members who are on screen a lot but don't do very much. Julianne Moore's villain is potentially incredible, and after one scene with her, you're like, ooh, and then you spend the rest of the movie going, you just got Julianne Moore onto the set for a few days and shot with her, didn't you? Yeah, you didn't really give her room to breathe or do anything. Oh, okay. The Harry stuff does detract from it, and in the way I thought it would. It's Men in Black 2 syndrome. It's like, this worked, but he leaves. Well, let's do it again, and we'll find a contrived reason for him to be back into it so we can have the two of them. It's, again, not worth seeking out. Fun. There is some stuff in there that's really cool, but it's overshadowed by the stuff. Blade Runner 2049. Confession time. I'm not a big fan of Blade Runner. I've only ever seen it properly once, about a few years ago. It's one of those movies I thought I'd seen just through cultural osmosis, like I'd absorbed it, like Psycho. I didn't really see Psycho till I was like 17, and for years I thought I'd seen it because, you know, pop culture quotes and references it so much, and pop culture took so much from the original Blade Runner that maybe I went in with too lofty an expectation. But I've never heard anybody up to that point. I've never heard anyone say, oh, I'm not a big fan of Blade Runner. People will always be like, oh my god, Blade Runner is amazing. So I went in with just like, everyone is universally praising it. So I watched the final cut, which is the definitive version, and I was like, yeah, there's some really striking, interesting things here, but I guess it's because I grew up in one of the generations that got movies and TV stuff that was based on the look and feel of Blade Runner. So maybe it wasn't as interesting to me because of that. But also pacing-wise, I thought it was really odd. So when it came to, I completely respect it for what it did for film and what it did for the sci-fi cinema and everything. And there are some fantastic performances in there, Rutger Hauer especially. So when I was going into Blade Runner 2049, I wasn't like, yeah! I was like, okay, let's see. I kind of prefer it. Blasphemy! But whatever. Just pretend I'm a replicant and use that as your excuse. The noir is a bigger element of this one. The first one was definitely a film noir. This one sort of revels in it. There's a lot more walking the beat, investigation, but the change in Blade Runner 2049 is you are watching a movie about a man whose job it is to round up fake humans, you know, replicants, who happens to be a replicant himself. One that is fully aware of what he's doing and is completely fine with it and doesn't have any emotional attachment to the fact that, you know, the people he's having to round up are like him. He's like, no, it's just my job. But then he discovers something that makes him start to doubt that. So, it's a noir film, but with a much more personal stake for your central character. Ryan Gosling is fantastic in the role. His supporting cast are wonderful, especially his AI. I don't want to say too much about it because it will give things away. Jared Leto is pretty great as the villain. He's only given a couple scenes. Villain's sort of a wrong kind of term, I suppose. He's the antagonist in terms of the good stuff you want to happen. He will stop it from happening. But he's interesting. His character's interesting. Harrison Ford, I really wish that they'd somehow not marketed it with him in it, because Deckard's involvement in the story is... minimal's the wrong word. It's not key to the whole movie, so when he does arrive, it would have just been a really pleasant surprise that he was part of the story. Gorgeous landscapes. It's a film that really takes its time on purpose. It's very long, but about 50% of that is establishing shots and mood shots. And I'll say this, wasn't bored once, really took me. It's made me want to revisit the original again. I think I'll have a newfound sort of respect for that world. I totally recommend Blade Runner 2049, whether you've seen Blade Runner or not, simply because it's a visually gorgeous storytelling experience. If you're going to watch it on home media, which is probably the likely way you're going to watch it now, turn this off. Do not be faffing with anything. Just sit back and let the film happen to you, and you'll have a blast. Jigsaw. I am an unapologetic fan of the Saw series. I know they're not great. The first one is pretty great. It's a really cool thriller. The second one is an interesting horror sequel. The third one's kind of cool. 4, 5, terrible. 6, sort of better, in a way. 7, awful. But ultimately, I do enjoy them. I like the police procedural part of it more than the horror and the gore. Because that was the problem. The original movie was a thriller. The second one expanded on it. The third one wrapped it up. And then it suddenly became torture porn. It wasn't even an air quote, it was just an air claw, torture porn. I do the quotes, but my finger's been caught from a jigsaw trap. Torture porn. The point is, I liked the investigation side of it, which does show up more in 6, which is why I think a lot of people enjoy 6, who stuck with the series. This movie is no spoilers. If you want to hear spoilers, I go into it in Big Damn Cast. This movie is set after the films, which you might be thinking, but Jigsaw's dead! Yeah? But you'll have to watch the film to find out what's going on. The traps are very minimal in comparison to the rest of the series, which is both this film's biggest strength and its greatest weakness. Its biggest strength is the simpler approach. It reminds you of the first couple of films. The gore is more, the most nastiest of stuff is more implied rather than seen. Which is good, because this will always create something more disgusting than what these see. That's also the downside, because yes, this is a spin-off, it's really not a sequel, it's a spin-off from the series. Like, this is, you know, to say like that you have your films, then you have a spin-off novel. This is the spin-off novel, just happens to be a film. Because the scale of it all, like the stakes were raised throughout the series, this being the latest entry within that franchise, almost feels like they've taken the training wheels and put them back on for a bit. And it's like, very minimal character development. The one really interesting character in the movie is done a disservice by their storyline sort of just ending with a at the end of the film. Tobin Bell is in it playing John Kramer. I won't say how, but when he rocks up, in his first scene when he rocks up, you're like, oh, there he is. And you suddenly remember what you liked about the series when you first checked it out, if indeed you were a fan. Not good, not a good movie, but if you're a fan of Saw, definitely not the worst, in my opinion. You might enjoy it. Check it out next Halloween on a streaming service. Give yourself a gory giggle. Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok, 3rd Thor movie. 5th one to feature Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's the best Thor movie. The first Thor is a Shakespearean story of family and also a little bit set on Earth, fish out of water stuff. The second one, unfortunately, tries to be Game of Thrones, which is really not Thor. And also does a massive disservice to the actors in the cast by only really giving 2 of them stuff to work with, Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston, respectively. The third one is a space road trip comedy sci-fi Flash Gordon-esque fever dream, and it's all the better for it. It is definitely a sequel to Thor: The Dark World, because Asgard is in the place it was when we last saw it in Thor: The Dark World. You see the repercussions of how that movie ended. We have a really fun villain, Cate Blanchett as Hela. I was talking to Lucy about this the other week. We realised that everyone's going, oh my god, she's finally an amazing MCU villain. I don't know. I think she's brilliant. I think Cate Blanchett is amazing. She has an absolute blast in the way her character looks and the aesthetic of the character, the way that, like, the big headdress from the comics that I absolutely love. And I was like, I hope they do it in the film. They do. The way she sort of just rubs her hands on her head and it appears. Visually, she's amazing. She looks kind of hot. gothy Cate Blanchett works. The problem is, if you just read the script, I assume she would just read the same as any other MCU villain. It's just she brings a bit more to it. So it's a step in the right direction, and I would not be against that character popping up in future if that was possible. Tom Hiddleston is a joy to watch again. Mark Ruffalo does some amazing work, both as in performance capture and live action himself as the Hulk and Bruce Banner respectively. Taika Waititi's eye for visuals is really interesting. For a comedy director to bring this sort of like rock album painted on the side of a panel van aesthetic to the movie is wonderful. His character Korg's fun as well. God, it's a lot of fun. Like Carl Urban's there, doesn't get much to do. Idris Elba's there, doesn't get much to do. But when they do pop up, it is a joy. And Chris Hemsworth, it's Chris Hemsworth movie. It's Thor Ragnarok. Him and Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie, I think, are the highlight of the film. And yeah, it's just, out of the 3 MCU movies this year, Guardians 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, and this, I still think Guardians might be the best. And I think this and Spider-Man Homecoming are a joint second, but for different reasons. Thor Ragnarok was amazing. A nice little bit of levity, because this year the 3 Marvel films have been a lot of fun. Yes, there's been tension and scary bits, a lot of it revolving around family, but they've been very fun. And I think that's intentional, because it's going to get a bit intense with Black Panther in February, and then everything's going to get bleak as hell in Infinity War. So, revel in the fun age of Marvel while it lasts. Definitely check out Thor Ragnarok. The problem with Apu. Now, I'm going to be very brief on this one because it wasn't a cinematic release in the UK, but it is available online in various forms if you wish to watch it. It is about a stand-up comedian who's an American-born New York guy, but his parents are from Asia, and about growing up in the 90s in America, where the only representation of specifically like an Indian gentleman on mainstream television in a popular show was Apu Nahasapima Petalon from The Simpsons. So this documentary is essentially him and other comedians of like Asian descent or from Asia talking about how Apu, the character, makes them feel, and how the culture around The Simpsons and around the show in America in reference to him makes them feel. It's a fascinating documentary. And you're probably thinking, oh God, are you going to try and boycott it? Oh, SJWs, la la la. He preempts that mindset and talks to you about that in the first 5 minutes. It's summed up beautifully by him saying, you're probably saying, oh God, it's just a character, it's just a comedy show. Lay off, he's not that offensive. The Simpsons stereotype everybody. Just be quiet about it. He says, I have been quiet about it for 25 years. So you're like, yeah, okay, I think this is... If you've got a problem with him talking about this, shut up. You don't have to watch. It is fascinating. The documentary tries, as its main narrative, to sit down with head writers of the current show, of the current Simpsons, and absolutely sit down with Hank Azaria, the voice actor who plays Apu, who is a white guy. And as a voice actor myself, I'm like, yeah, I don't think you should necessarily be bound by your own physical appearance or heritage when voice acting, but to certain degrees, you know? Like, if the character is an Indian gentleman and is a character who appears once and has 2 lines or 3 lines, whichever one of your cast can do it, respectfully, obviously, go for it. But if that character is a recurring fixture, you should maybe cast somebody who's not being, whether willing or not, insensitive by playing that role. So Hank Azaria's been playing the role for like nearly 30 years. This documentary is like, why did it start that way? Why is he the voice of that character? And should Apu stay in The Simpsons, or should he be changed? Like, what happens now? It's a really fascinating documentary, and I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's only 45 minutes long, 50 minutes long, so you can bash it out in a lunch hour. That's not what I meant. Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, or the full title is Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, featuring a very special contractually obligated mention of Tony Clifton. This is fantastic. This is a Netflix documentary film, which is made up of 2 halves, edited together. One is a contemporary, recorded this year interview with Jim Carrey about what it was like making Man on the Moon, the film based on Andy Kaufman, the comedian. And the other half of the movie is behind-the-scenes footage of Man on the Moon, recorded over 20 years ago when they were making it. Footage that, up until now, was not allowed to be seen. Because Jim Carrey, he didn't go method with the role, but he pretty much went there. Like, he tried to just be Andy Kaufman and go through what Andy would go through, so he could stay in that part, because Andy was a very dedicated character comic. And he was an arsehole to people on set. Not Andy Kaufman, Jim Carrey in the role. Not necessarily as Andy Kaufman, but definitely as Andy's character, Tony Clifton, and definitely as Andy at certain points in the story. I only saw Man on the Moon once, about 10 years ago, and I really want to revisit it. Andy Kaufman is someone who, the more I hear about it, the more I'm like, oh my god, I want to go back and learn about this guy. Because I'm 26, so, you know, he died at the age of 35, like, long before I was old enough to have any interest or awareness of his work. But I want to find out more now, and I need to see Man on the Moon again, mostly because of this documentary's made me want to revisit it. Jim Carrey is in a weird place in his life right now. He seems incredibly content and happy, and that's fine, good on him, but he's also it's when you watch him, you're sort of like, oh, you might be crazy, and if he is, but he's happy, fair enough. So this documentary, going in, I was a bit like, is this just going to be a pretentious thing where an actor talks about how he pretentiously methoded the role for a pretentious approach to a project that could have been, but ended up actually being heartwarming rather than pretentious? No, it's much more than that. It's a fascinating little glimpse into being a real-life person, like in an adaptation of their life story, when that real-life person was never really completely real to those around him and was essentially playing a character, and then would play other characters completely in character. Like, how do you approach that? It's a really interesting piece of film. If you want to learn about the world of slightly more surrealist comedy and absurd stand-up and things like that, and performance art, definitely give it a watch, because you're watching essentially a documentary about Andy Kaufman and a documentary about the making of the film about Andy Kaufman from the point of view of the guy who played him. Worth your time. Pretty cool. On Netflix, check it out. Murder on the Orient Express, based on the Agatha Christie book of the same name, starring Hercule Poirot. Which is weird. When they were doing the press for this movie, a lot of the press was about the fact that it starred a massive ensemble cast of big-name actors, like, you know, some up-and-comers and some really established ones in the world of film and stage. And a lot of publicity went into talking about the moustache that Kenneth Branagh wears in the film. It was really surprising to me that so much of the British press never once mentioned the David Suchet ITV show, which is probably the most well-known version of Poirot culturally in the United Kingdom, aside from obviously the books themselves. Now, I'd seen the two prior film adaptations, I can't remember if they were both cinema releases, but the one with Albert Finney and the one with Peter Ustinov in the role. I have seen David Suchet TV adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express, so I was interested to see the Kenneth Branagh version. It's cool, it's fine, it's very comfortable. It's a very comfortable movie. The cast do a wonderful job, the mystery is unfurled in such a very pleasant way. The character who is the titular murdered person is played by an actor who, considering a really uncomfortable position in their life, which may or may not have something to do with them may or may not being a horrible person, is weirdly sort of perfect casting, because this character, you're not really meant to have a full sense of who they are, but you're definitely meant to feel uncomfortable around them. So, just saying. My only problems really with this movie were it's very cinematic. There are a lot of big establishing shots, grand sweeping shots, the mountains and the desert lands and everything that they're going through on the train, which then undercuts the end of the story. Without giving any spoilers away for a book that was written like 100 years ago, without giving any spoilers away, the ending of the story has a note of, oh. And it just leaves you thinking. It's an ending that leaves you thinking about morality. It's not cut and dry, and the day was saved. It's sort of like a, So for all these big sweeping shots, the film sort of tries to turn it into an epic, which doesn't end like an epic. So you almost leave feeling deflated. I think this is definitely the best adaptation of an Agatha Christie for contemporary viewers. If you're a younger viewer who maybe is familiar with Marple or Poirot from the TV show or whatever, and you're like, I kind of want to check it out, this would be a good in point. And if you enjoy it, go and check out some of the books or some of the earlier TV shows based on her works. But it's not the best Orient Express. However, a pleasant time at the cinema. Probably will be a lot of fun on DVD. And finally, I saw this fresh last night, The Disaster Artist. The James Franco directed, starring, produced by, and written by adaptation of the memoirs about the Tommy Wiseau acted in, produced, directed by, written and edited movie The Room. The Room is a notorious 2003 terrible movie that is made by a living enigma, a man who is just a walking bizarre oddity. It's a terrible piece of work due to its editing, to its pacing, its dialogue. It's so odd. I am nearly done reading The Disaster Artist, which is the book by Greg Sestero and Tom Bissell, the journalist. Greg Sestero was Mark in The Room, about the making of the film and their relationship. This movie is a dramatisation of this book, and it does miss out. Again, like I said, I'm not done. I'm nearly there, but it misses out a lot of the juiciest stuff from the book. And it's a very Hollywood telling of the story of this actor who meets this other actor and grows to admire him simply because he's fearless, despite the fact he's also terrible. He Greg really likes Tommy's confidence, despite Tommy's clear lack of talent. So they join forces and head to LA to try and make it big together. And when things aren't working out for Tommy, Tommy's going to make his own movie. And it's called The Room. And he's going to pay for it all, with a budget of $5+ million. No one knows where he got the money from. No one knows why money's an issue. No one knows where he's from, despite the fact that he says he grew up in New Orleans, even though his voice sounds like this. It's like, huh? No one knows his real age. He tells Greg to never tell people about his private life. A bit late. But there's stuff that even Greg doesn't know. And he makes a movie that isn't very good, doing everything wrong and being an absolute horrible monster on set to the people around him. This is a very Hollywood version of the story. It's more a subtle homoerotic undertone that motivates this film, and Tommy in particular. And it's very uncomfortable to watch in places, and I think the casting of two brothers in the lead roles was done consciously to aid that feeling of these two really get on, but this is a really uncomfortable vibe given off from one of them. It works very well. Dave Franco is a brilliant straight man as Greg Sestero to James Franco's frighteningly accurate in places Tommy Wiseau. This is a love letter to odd cinema. If you liked The Room, you'll definitely want to see this. If you hated The Room, you'll definitely want to see this. If you liked Ed Wood, you'll really want to see this. It's a similar kind of thing. Ed Wood and, oh God, what was the movie? Came out last year starring Meryl Streep as the singer. It'll come to me, someone will mention it in the comments. But it's that kind of story of, we're really glorifying this that is terrible. Okay, like that's the story. Worth your time. Really interesting. It's odd. I don't get the obsession with this movie that's already out there, Oscar buzz and this, that. I don't know. I don't think it's that good. But it is a very good time at the cinema, and I saw it in the absolute ideal conditions. I saw it on opening night at the one screening that was going on in Lincoln, in a cinema where I'm glad I used my Odeon app to book. I've got Limitless, so I was like, oh, I'll be fine, I'll just stroll up. But I was like, oh, I'm curious for this one. There's only one showing. Glad I used it to book, because there was only about 4 seats available when I did book. When I got there, every seat was full. As soon as the movie started, every seat was full. I was in a cinema screening full of fans of The Room. And it was great. It was the best way to possibly watch this movie. Give it a try. It's really odd. It is weirdly touching. And just, oh, it's bullshit. It's not true. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark. That line was slightly wrong, but whatever. Go see the film. So, that's it for my movie review roundup. If you ever want my reviews as they happen, you need to head over to Big Damn Channel. In the Big Damn Cast, every week if we reviewed a movie, we've seen a movie, we talk about it at length, no spoilers and spoilers. You can check them out there every week. As for this channel, I'll see you soon. See you on Five Food Friends as well. Bye.